Hey everyone, Lisa here with Lisa One Creating Balance.
Hi, Russ here. How are you guys doing today?
Thanks for joining us. It, as always, is lovely to see you.
It is.
Today we had a great discussion as to what we were going to discuss, and we decided to discuss labels.
Labels. Labels are an interesting thing when you start thinking about it. Um, just because of the fact that, especially when you start attaching it to people and maybe even situations. But they are very interesting because sometimes what you need to do is step back and think about the label that you're attaching to something.
That was clear.
I thought so.
To expand on that,
Yeah, please do.
for example, we all have a label for ourselves, which is our identifier. My identifier is my name, Lisa. Russ has an identifier.
Depending on who you're talking to that day, if it's her, it could be anything.
His identifying label is Russ.
Yes.
However, it's more than that. And to help us understand this a little bit about the impact that labels have on people and the energy surrounding them, I will take a page out of my book, as in, when my parents got married, my mother is Caucasian and my dad is Asian and indigenous of sorts. And it wasn't really uh, practiced then that interracial marriages happened. And so we, my brother and I, ended up being labeled as many interesting things as children. I think one of the most significant ones was half breed. We were called half breeds a lot. I was not at all shy about calling anybody out on their words that they used against me. I was called many other things. Half breed was probably one of the gentler terms that was used on me. However, this was a label that was given to me as a child by other children, and other children who more than likely learned those labels from their parents. And it can be very impactful on people when you throw a label on them. A label, and you may not even know that person's journey or even who they are or where they're from.
Yes, and this is where the part comes in is that you may want to be mindful of when you attach a label to a person or even a situation, what you are saying about that. Now, giving an example here, if you say, well, that person is an admin assistant. What is your immediate thought about that person? Okay. So, what do you think that person does? Because for a lot of us, we've got this assumption of what an admin person does. And I can guarantee it in a lot of places, the admin person is the person who's really running the place. Multi talented, multifaceted, does a whole lot more than just answers the phones and, you know,
Sorts the mail.
sorts the mail, does emails, and that type of thing. Uh, so it's interesting when you start to really think about the label that you're attaching to a person, um, that really only honestly defines what
One part of them, one
one
small
small
part
part
of
of
them.
that person. It
Mm-hmm.
really does. Amanda Marshall's got a song out, and I don't know. I'm sorry, I apologize. I can't remember the song, but one of the lines in the song is the taxi driver. Um, I think it goes something like the taxi driver that's in front of you has a PhD, and yet while we're sitting behind the guy looking at him, we're thinking, oh, he's just a taxi driver. But that's so far from the truth.
Mm-hmm. And also, what's interesting is there are people that I know that paid their way through university to get some of their wonderful degrees by stripping because it pays well and you have student loans. So, when we think of labels that we place on people, really be mindful of what it is that you're actually trying to say. And the other thing to be mindful of is the word just. If I said to somebody, I'm just an admin assistant, I have basically minimized my entire job. If somebody says to you, well, they're just cleaners, that person has minimized that entire person's job. And yet, everything that everybody does in any organization plays an integral part in making sure the organization runs, whether you're a small business or a large corporation. There is no just anything in a business. So be conscious of using that word just in front of anything, or they're just Asian, for instance, as I have heard that in my life, that she's just an Asian. Um, Actually, I'm not. If we want to get right down to it, I'm more than that. And I actually honor that part of my heritage, the Asian part of my heritage, as well as all the other heritages that I have within this body. And when we think of people who work in spirituality, well, she just reads cards.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much more than that.
Mm-hmm.
She just does energy Reiki thing. Learn to understand. At least have the conversation with the person to help you understand so that when you do choose to put a label on somebody that it actually has some validity.
Yeah, and it's the thing of, well, she just reads cards, but that really, have you talked to that person? Do you know what else they do? Because the that may be just an assumption on your part, on somebody else that's told you what this particular person does. You may be very surprised at what else they do. They may do have a fantastic collection of sound bowls that would just be unbelievable when you sat in the middle of it and listened to it. Um, they may be
They may have their psychiatry,
they may have their psychiatry.
their psychology.
They may be a scientist.
Exactly.
Like, we know of somebody that's like that.
That's right. There's many, many facets to every person. And when we start to try to create a label to put somebody into a particular box, we are actually taking the value of that person and we're minimizing it substantially. It's so easy for us to want to put people in places that we believe they should belong. However, allow people to be who they are. And if you have questions, instead of labeling them, have a conversation with that person. And right now, I know during COVID, it's a little kind of weird to take somebody out for coffee, but guess what? You can hook up from Facebook Messenger, do a video call. There's Zoom, there's Google, there's Microsoft.
Teams, yeah.
Pick one, pick a program, and have coffee or tea with this person, or a glass of wine if that's what it is, and get to know them a little bit better. And understand that when we are speaking of people, that's people. They have feelings, they have understanding themselves. And I had an awesome thing happen to me when Russ and I lived in Evergreen. I was out front of our place and I was planting some flowers, minding my own business, doing my flower planting. And this wonderful neighbor of ours came roaring across the road, across our lawn, and I saw her and I greeted her. And the words out of her mouth were, "Are you Filipina?" And I said, "No." And she turned around and walked away from me. Not really sure how I was supposed to react to that, but I kind of shrugged and went, okay. Carried on with planting my flowers. Mainly because she had made an assumption. She chose to come and see if her assumption was correct. It wasn't. And so she carried on with her life as I carried on with mine. So that was easily rectified right there in about 10 seconds.
10 seconds.
And that was that. So there was one label that I did not have in that moment because that person wanted to be sure before she just assumed who I was.
Yeah. Yeah. The energy that surrounds a label, or if you want to put it around a word, we're getting back to what we've talked about before also, is that when you think about the energy around that word, um, it can shift when you're using a different word, using a different label. And it really is important not to assume something.
Absolutely. And also, with today's society, and I identify as female. I was born female, I identify as female. However, not everyone who has been born female identifies female. And it is short sighted of us to presume that anybody who is born female should identify as female. That's up to the person.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
Or male for that matter.
Or male.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think it was really interesting. Russ and I were in a Safeway one day. And back in the day when Safeway used to have their Safeway cards. And Russ used my Safeway card to pay for the groceries. And the lovely lady behind the till, without even looking at him, said, "Thank you, Mr. Wong." And then she turned around and looked at him, and she was absolutely speechless. She had no idea what to say because he doesn't really look Chinese much.
At all.
And so, from presuming that I was married to him, so he must be Chinese, and then finding that no, no, he's not.
Yeah.
So also being conscious of what you're saying when you're placing labels.
Yeah, and a thought just occurred to me. So let's say for the next 4 or 5 days, um, be very mindful of when you assume something about somebody or you attach a label to them. Try and catch yourself and think about what else could you assume about that person. There's a lot of things that we could learn from them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like Lisa said, like if you can have a conversation with them, you may be very, very surprised what that person is actually like. And we've run into situations before with where we've assumed things. And this goes back a long time ago. We were out for dinner here in Calgary, and we'd been sitting there for about 20 minutes or so, and this lady comes in with the host, and the host starts showing her around. And our assumption was that just because of the way that the woman carried herself, we assumed that she was either scoping the place out for something, for a party, or something like that. And then the host sat her down by herself.
Mm.
Again, we started assuming things, right? And then we asked how did we get about that? We asked the host something. I can't remember. Anyways, we found out that
We asked if she was there by herself,
yeah,
I
they're
think.
by herself. Yeah, and the host said, "Yeah, she is. It's her birthday." And the both of us looked at each other and just okay, that's interesting. Um, and we sent a drink to her, I think, wasn't it?
No, we invited her
We
to come and
okay, yeah,
sit.
we invited her to come over and sit with us. We found out, anyway. Sorry, long story short, we found out that she was a stewardess, travels the does the international or the
Yep.
international flights, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was her birthday, and she treats herself on her birthday every year to go out by herself, just to enjoy good scenery, good food, and that type of thing. And she was just a wonderful lady.
Oh, she was beautiful
She,
to sit with.
yeah, she was. She just had a great attitude.
Great
Yeah,
stories.
great stories, and it was just one of those things. And afterwards, we just went, okay, it's the last time we assumed something ever. You
Yeah.
know,
And it was probably one of the most humbling moments for
oh,
us.
it was.
We sure learned something about ourselves
Yep.
that day. And yet we were able to meet somebody who had so much to share and so much to offer and insight and
Yeah.
stories and just personal glimpses into what life as a flight attendant looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet there was so many labels we placed on that woman the moment she walked in that door.
Yeah.
And every one of them was proven wrong.
Yeah. Yes, it was humbling, all right.
And it's so funny because I have tons of stories about my last name and being who I am. And my mother told me one about her experience. She used to work in the one of the banks in High River, and I believe it was in the RCMP detachment there. A bunch of the older, seasoned officers that had been in High River for a while were having this new guy on, and they told him to go into the bank and ask for Mrs. Wong. He won't miss her. She's the only Wong in there. Well, he walked in and he asked for Mrs. Wong, and my mother walked out, and she is 5'2" Caucasian lady. And the poor young man was absolutely astounded to be presented with this totally not Chinese lady. And so, again, here is something that you can take a label and it can be so misconstrued because of what our expectation is.
Yeah. What our assumption is, we
Yeah.
attached a label to something,
Mm.
right? So yeah, it's very interesting how things can change fairly fast when you've been made to realize the label that you attached to something was completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And that's when this whole energy starts to change around what you assumed about that person or about the situation, that type of thing. Just like there's the old saying, there's two sides to a story, and most of the time, all we hear is one side, and we assume things because
Yes.
of that.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Labels are necessary. We do need labels for things.
Yeah. What was the example you gave earlier to me? You said, "Oh yeah, right, yeah." So I'd rather have syrup on my pancakes than apple cider.
Vinegar.
Apple cider vinegar. Yes.
So yes, labels are there are places for labels. Absolutely, 100%. Doctors work hard to get that particular label. They go to school. And you know what? Lots of people ply their trade to be known as who they are. Whether you are an energy healing practitioner or a tarot and oracle card reader or a psychotherapist or whatever the case may be, when we are honest and we use integrity for what it is we do, then we ask that others try not to minimize what it is that we are here to achieve,
Yeah.
and to be of service with. And I know this is a term that floats around all the time. Russ and I have already discussed this particular term, and it's the term woo woo. Some people, it doesn't bother to be called woo woo. For myself, I sometimes feel in the context that it is being said in, that it does minimize what it is I do. And I feel that for myself, I usually speak out against that when people say that to me, because I explain to them then what it is I do, because that tells me that they don't really understand. And because I would like to create a space for them to sit with me, and we can understand together their point of view as well as them opening up to understand my point of view, then we've actually created a beautiful discussion. However, if the person is not open to discussion, then there's nothing that I can do or say. And for that, then I still own who I am, and I release that label back, because that's not who I am.
Yeah. So the lesson in that story is that I no longer call her woo woo. In certain situations. I like how I got out of that one.
He didn't. Let's be clear.
Okay, fine, I didn't.
And so with labels, it's important to understand the language and the energy that you're putting into the label. We use terms of endearment to our spousal equivalent, significant others, spouses, partners, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever you want to call them. Because there's lots of labels for those people.
There's lots of labels for those people, yes.
But we all have terms of endearment. One of the things to be conscious of is ensure that it is known to be a term of endearment. And if it is hurtful, that you maybe not use that label.
Yeah, and you can quickly find that out just by watching the other person's reaction. And if you're not sure, ask.
Ask. Yeah.
Really ask, you know, because again, it's that whole energy thing. So the person that is that you're directing it to is not feeling good about that term for some reason or another, then that's not on you. But at the same time, realize that it, for whatever reason it is hurtful, and you know, ask if they're okay with that. Mm-hmm.
And also understand that sometimes a label can be a trigger for a past trauma.
Yeah.
For somebody, you could, for instance, girls and women very often will call each other bitches. They do. However, in some situations, that could be a trigger for a traumatic event in somebody's life. And so it's to be aware of your surroundings in the context, and also be very aware of who's in the room when you use some of these terms.
Yes, very much so. That's very true. And example on that one is that my staff at work, when they start getting together and they start talking about things and this happens with a, I think it happens with anybody or any situation where where people get together and they start talking. They forget what's going on around them because they're so involved in the conversation or having fun or whatever it may be. And the point I bring this point up because of the fact that sometimes they put a few too many swear words in their conversation. You know,
Too many F bombs.
too many f bombs. Really, if that's putting it bluntly, yes, that's exactly what it is. And then I have to come along and say, "Hey, customers in the store," you know. So yeah, be aware of what's going on around you.
Yeah, it is important. And really know your audience. And if you don't know your audience, err on the side of caution.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not telling you not to be yourself. However, I am recommending that you use kindness because kindness is needed so much today in the world. There are so many things going around that aren't spoken in kindness and they're spoken out of anger and the heat of the moment. And I understand that. However, we do need kindness. And if this is one way that we can understand kindness and bring kindness into our lives, then by all means, let's rock it on the labels and
Yeah.
be kind about it.
Be kind about it.
Mhm.
Definitely.
And, by the way, I'm not French, from Paris, France, by the way, because I've been asked if I'm from Paris. I'm not. I'm 100% Canadian, just so we're all aware. I am the melting pot epitome of Canadian. So, as is Russ. He's not quite the melting pot I am, but he is Canadian.
I am.
And there's another one of our labels.
And there's one of our other labels. Yes.
So think about how you address yourself and the labels that you use with yourself, with your family,
Mm-hmm.
your friends,
Mm-hmm.
and then those people that you know, don't know, and those who have different opinions and understandings than you.
Yeah.
And are you using labels on these people that may be used because you're not understanding their point of view or allowing yourself the space or to create the space to understand other points of view without being hurtful?
Yeah. And one of the more important parts of what Jaleesa just said there is that the labels that you attach to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Be mindful of those.
Be very conscious of
Be
those.
very conscious of those.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you start realizing the labels or the type of labels that you're attaching to whatever it is about yourself, you are going to start, you're going to begin to realize that maybe changing that label, changing that different to a different word, will change that whole energy thing again about you.
Mm-hmm. So when you do something that may not be ideal, don't use the derogatory term that probably is the first thing that comes to your mind.
Oh, how could I be so stupid?
Yes. Maybe it could be, I'm learning today. Bring back that power, that energetic power. Put the power into the positivity as opposed into the negativity.
Yeah.
Find labels that are enhancing as opposed to minimizing. And be aware that everyone out there, every person, every being has the capacity to be hurt by one word that we may speak.
Then that most of the time is a label.
And the other thing of it is they may also be uplifted by one word we speak, which
Yes.
may also be a label.
Yes. Very true.
When you think of this, have you told anybody how beautiful they are today?
Or how good of a job they do for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or how well they do at what it is they do.
Yeah. Or just even thanking them for the small things that they do.
Yeah, for anything.
For anything at all. Yeah.
So be aware that people are not just people. People are people in their entirety, however they are, however they think, feel. And when we can create a space that welcomes conversation as opposed to closing doors by placing negative labels, then we create community.
Yeah. And you create energy that is shifting and goes towards the positive.
Yes. Conversation is great. I recommend it. Open up the conversation, open up the door to conversation. Even if you don't agree, sit down and have a coffee and talk about it. Don't argue about it on social media.
Oh, that's a whole new
That's a whole
subject.
other
That's a
subject.
whole other subject. Let's not even go there now.
So remember with labels, that's all they are. However, labels can be very defining. So be very conscious of what labels you use to define who you are.
Yes, because it is very important.
Yes. Okay, so that's it for us for labels. If you have any questions, ask Russ.
Oh, thanks for that. Sure, just fire them off.
He knows everything.
Yeah, no, don't.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody. And
And stay curious.
stay curious.